would you turn to Luke chapter 6? And a couple of things I'm going to say before we get into that, but I'm just going to warn you right now, my sermon today is longer than usual. I know preachers usually tell you it's going to be shorter. It's not. Part of that is it's just a little bit lengthier. And the second part is, I know everyone's all upset about COVID. I'm all upset about allergies. And they are like awful right now. And so I'll probably set a record for taking drinks of water from my water bottle today. If you count things like that in sermons. I know I used to... When I used to sit in sermons, we'd get the full, 4-page bulletin in my church, and I would sit there and just make up, word searches in the bulletin, and things like that, and when I was sitting in church. So I don't know what you do. Hope you listen. But anyway, a couple things. One is, I want to read a text I got this morning, and of course, I knew who it was as soon as I saw the crazy, strange international number. It was Wes Pala, and Wes Pala was with us 8 weeks ago, and he is an American missionary to Brazil, and he had, of course, was headed back to Brazil and starting a brand new church, and with the intent of starting a Bible college in a completely different part of Brazil than he had been. And if you're not familiar with his story, he had an issue with getting his passport, and God just miraculously took care of that for his brand new baby son. And then a couple weeks ago, I think it was 2 weekends ago, they went down, they were in Miami, I think, and they were going to fly down to Brazil, and they would not let the baby on the plane because they didn't think the paperwork was proper or something like that. I don't remember the exact deal. And so baby Wes and his wife Cynthia ended up having to stay in Florida while Wes and the rest of the family went to Brazil. But he just said, because we text sometimes, he said, I just want to thank you for praying. This will be our first Sunday in Brazil, and the whole family's here. Without going into too much detail of what transpired this past week, it's a miracle that Cynthia and our son were able to get in. God is so good, and we praise the Lord for those of you who have partnered with us to pray for him, to work on our behalf. We love and appreciate you all. And of course, my intention is to lead our church towards really being a help to Wes. And even as he hopefully has some national pastors that he would need sponsored in Brazil, that we could be a help with that. I'd really love, I don't know when things are going to clear up, but when things do clear up with COVID, definitely we want to go on several trips. One is take some people back to Cuba, and then another one is definitely want to go to Brazil. In a couple weeks, actually, I'll get to that in a moment. I'll say it. In a couple weeks, we're going to have a speaker here who is going to start a church in the San Francisco Bay Area. We've already been supporting him. And so if things look good next year, we have briefly talked. I need to talk to him more about it. Send a crew out there to help him for a week or so. It would be much like, if you went on our Jamaica missions trip last year, it was like half vacation, half missions trip. And it would be a little bit like that, where we go do a lot of things out that way in San Francisco area. But he's looking to do several things, like maybe have a VBS before he even starts his church. And again, I don't know what his plans are now that COVID has taken over, but in a lot of areas. But I'm hoping if things are good next summer, we'll send a crew out there and help with that. So we have some things like that coming up that I think are going to be fun and exciting. Today is going to be the first day we are doing different content in the two services. So I'm going to preach both services today as a different sermon next time. I'm going to continue Luke here, and then in the second service, I'm going to start a series on the book of Ruth. Now, in August, there's 5 Sundays in August. There's only one where I'll preach twice. Bob's going to preach once, Joe's going to preach once, Mitchell's going to preach once, and then the man who's going to go start a church in San Francisco, his name is Caleb Finley. He's going to preach once also. So just so you know, that's what we're doing. So I just want to encourage you that sometime during this week, when you're sitting there and you're thinking I don't know what to do, or when you're sitting there thinking hey, I know I'm about to watch the 8th episode in a row of my favorite TV show, but maybe instead you can watch the next sermon. All right, so you can keep up on the content. Like I said, you can just watch it sometime during the week. It'll be on Facebook. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be I think on our website, but I know it'll definitely be in those other 2 places. So Luke 6:12, and there are a lot of different methods of preaching, and I really enjoy expository preaching. I'm not sure if heavyweight expository preachers would call what I do expository preaching, but I like to take a book of the Bible and go through it, and this is our 22nd sermon. in Luke. And at the rate we go, and as I take some breaks, because we'll take a break from Luke after today, we'll finish Luke sometime in 2022, I'm guessing, right? But I'm going to preach on prayer today. And I know we just preached on prayer. It was like 7 Luke sermons ago. It was during the days of online church. It was during the days when we had the table up here, and me and Bob were sitting here, and we were doing some discussions. It was a week after Easter, and we looked at this verse from Luke 5:16, where it said, Jesus withdrew himself into the wilderness and prayed. And Bob and I discussed that when Jesus had a lot of demands on his life, he withdrew and prayed. Thus, we asked a question: when you have a lot of demands on your life, do you withdraw and pray? Do you prefer to fret? Do you like to withdraw from the world but not pray? Do you like to spend money? Do you like to binge? Do you like to resort to bad habits? Do you like to take it out on others? And so, since we spoke about this topic 3 months ago, you might be asking, well, why are we going to preach on this again? Well, because Jesus praying comes up again in the Bible, which is what you do when you just follow through a text. So I think God wants it mentioned again. But also, I would just ask, how has your prayer life improved since we last talked about it 14 weeks ago? Has anything changed for the better? So maybe Jesus wants us to have a follow-up exam. We talked then about the need to withdraw and pray. And today I'm going to talk about the sacrifice of prayer. So we're going to read Luke 6:12 and 13. It says, "And it came to pass in those days that Jesus went out into a mountain to pray, and he continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called unto him his disciples, of whom he chose 12, whom he also named apostles." And we went through that list of apostles last week. So picking these 12 apostles was a huge deal, right? It was a big task. Jesus had spent the night in prayer asking his Father for it. The names of the disciples is also recorded in Matthew's Gospel. And just before they're listed in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus said this very famous verse. He said, "The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into his harvest." And workers are needed in God's kingdom, and Jesus prayed all night for it. Now, staying up all night, that's really hard, right? We need rest, we need sleep. But Jesus understood that he needed something more than rest. I remember earlier this year, it could have been late last year or very early this year, someone in our church was talking to Bob and I about just a major issue in his life and in his family. And he texted me super early one morning, and he said, you know what? He's like, I prayed all night. I stayed up all night and I prayed. It's bothered me so much. And I have my answer, and we have peace in our family, and everything's solved. And, things like that really do work. I really think prayer is pretty much, I don't want to say pretty much, is the most untapped resource in the world. I mean, you can make a request to the all-powerful Creator. In Genesis, the Bible tells us God spoke and things existed. And don't ever lose that amazement and that faith that you can ask Him, the one who speaks and things happen, to make something happen in your life or the life of others. And sometimes when we look and say, okay, well, what keeps us from praying? It's different for people. Some people, they're just intimidated. Some people, it's very frustrating, feels like nothing has been accomplished, or you feel like, I've never really had prayers answered. Maybe some people think it's not worth their time. For some people, it's their schedule, whether it's their job, finding time to do it with their job, their kids, their recreation. They're just too busy. For some people, it's just, this is really inconvenient. And for some people, and I think this happens to a lot of people, is we're just already so blessed by God that a lot of times we don't have a trial to pray about. We don't feel like we have an issue to pray about. We don't feel like we have a hardship that needs prayer. But that just begs the question, do you only pray when things are bad? Is he a priority? Are we so consumed by everything else we have to do that we forget that God can empower us and work to accomplish what he made us to do? God can give us wisdom to avoid mistakes. With his power and guidance and wisdom, we can just accomplish more for his glory. But is that something you even look for in prayer? Do you look for, okay, how will this glorify God? How is this God's will being done? When I read Jesus went out into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God, there's a sacrifice to praying, a sacrifice of so many things. We're going to talk about 5 things I think we need to sacrifice in order to pray and pray effectively. And we all have different things we want to sacrifice. Some of the points are going to speak to you, some won't. I'm just challenging you to discern what you need to sacrifice in order to pray. And today's sermon is going to kind of come in two parts, on two different levels. There's some very, I think, more obvious levels of sacrifice that we're going to see in this passage. And then there's some deeper, harder levels of sacrifice that we'll look at in Psalm 109, and perhaps some things that you wouldn't even think that that's sacrifice. But in general, we don't like sacrifice, right? God has, in America, God has shown his favor and blessing in our nation for centuries. Our sacrifices sometimes and what we think they are, not all of them, but some of them, right, are so different than the rest of the world. Like when we sacrifice material goods, even then we're living at a very high standard compared to the rest of the world. And in my life also, I know I've said I would sacrifice many things. I started sacrificing many things, and then I would just pick them up again. Right? I've been guilty of that incomplete obedience many times in my life, and times when God spoke to me about changing something, and I didn't do it 100%. I kept back part of the sacrifice. I followed my conscience instead of God, and I didn't want to fully sacrifice. So what sacrifice is there in prayer? I have 5 points. First one is this. There's a sacrifice of better options. The sacrifice of better options is called commitment. All right, commitment is a sacrifice where you don't even know what you will sacrifice in the future. If you are committed, you're going to follow through no matter what may come. And the no matter what may come can be something fun, could be something exciting, could be something alluring, could be easier. But if you're committed then to prayer, then you're going to pray even when there's a better, more appealing option, right? Take marriage, right? If you're married and you're committed to your spouse, there are so many blessings to being married, but there's also a sacrifice. For instance, if all of a sudden someone who you thought was better came into your life and you thought, why not marry that person, right? Well, you have to sacrifice that better person, if you will, because you are committed to your spouse, right? When you're committed, you don't yet know what you're going to sacrifice. I remember when I surrendered to the ministry. It was August 8th, 1997. And I remember there was an invitation, and it wasn't even a sermon about serving God full time. In fact, one of the points was commitment. I remember that, and it bugged me. And I remember I walked the aisle, and I was talking to one of the assistant pastors, and I gave this very statement well, I think I kind of want to maybe go to Bible college, and maybe I'll be a full-time servant of God, perhaps. And he's just like, it was, I'm exaggerating, but exactly how I said it. But he said, are you committing to this? Like you're gonna do this? I was like, yes. It was just, really dragging it out of me in order to do it. And it's like, if we're committed to prayer, are we going to be committed to the answers that God gives? Right? Someone, I think it was one of you, said how, sometimes, or I don't know who it was now, but someone said something like, sometimes you pray for things and it's not even like how you wanted it, but you realize it makes sense and God's given you something great. When he answers your prayer, are you going to commit to follow through with action if necessary, with praise for the answer? Or do you just kind of keep praying for the answer you want? Are you committed to doing his will in prayer? Isn't that part of the Lord's Prayer, that thy will be done? Right? We see Jesus, he went out into a mountain to pray. He continued all night in prayer to God, and he has commitment, he has determination, he has resolve. And the Bible says we should pray without ceasing, right? For many of us, prayer is only a gap filler in the events of our lives. Jesus had a place he went to pray. In the New Testament, he called it a closet, a place where you can go and be by yourself and pray. But there was a place, and he had to get there. He was very committed to prayer. Right? Jesus goes out to this mountain to pray, and he had a time set aside for prayer. Sometimes we pray in our car, and that can be effective, but if that's all you do with prayer, then is your message to God you're just one of the many tasks in my multitasking, or, God, I'm just giving you the leftover crumbs of my time in between things. And there need to be prayer events, and there need to be prayer times in our life, not just prayer as an add-on to what I'm doing, but something to which I commit and sacrifice better options. But then, if I stick with prayer, what I will find out is the other options aren't actually better. Number 2, I'm just warning you right now. Number 2 and number 3 are going to be quick, and you're going to be like, are 4 and 5 this quick? No. All right, so number 2 is the sacrifice of solitude, right? So do you struggle with solitude? Maybe you don't want to be apart from other people. Maybe you don't want to be alone with your thoughts, right? Have you forgotten the wonderful presence of the Holy Spirit when you pray? In our era, just the logistics of being alone are difficult, even if you wanted to be alone. There's so many demands on you. People and obligations make demands on you. Your phone is constantly notifying you. Prayer time is a sacrifice of time away from your spouse or kids. So I think you'll find that the time spent in solitude with God will make your family times better. It might be a sacrifice, but the time you put in will strengthen your relationships because you'll be re-energized by God. Number 3, wasn't this quick? Number 3 is the sacrifice of strength, right? And so Jesus didn't sleep that night. We spend our lives making ourselves stronger physically, mentally, spiritually. And Paul said, when I am weak, then I am strong. Prayer will need a sacrifice of strength, not just physical strength, but sometimes the strength we find in our comfort zone. You know, maybe you don't pray because you don't feel like prayer is a strength, like something you're good at. And many people just like to do what they're good at, right? They work at prayer. And you'll find that God will minister to you and bestow favor on you in ways that you had not imagined. You'll be strong. That's the end of point 3. All right, so we're gonna shift to less obvious sacrifices. I want you to turn to Psalm 109. Psalm 109. And we're going to take this a little step deeper. 2 more points. And the sacrifice of better options and solitude and strength all exist, and you should sacrifice them in your life, but those are a little more obvious. I want to peel back the next layer. Psalm 109 is written by King David. It's called an imprecatory prayer or imprecatory psalm. And what it is Psalm 109 is a cry for justice. And as we read through it, we're not going to read the whole thing, we're going to read a good bit of it. It's going to seem as you read it like, this seems kind of like cruel, right? Like this seems kind of like angry, and it doesn't really fit with sometimes how we think we should talk to God or how God thinks, right? It's this, if you're not familiar with the Bible, you're going to read this and think, this doesn't sound like peace, love, and harmony that many people expect from the Bible, right? And I'm going to kind of preface this first, is like, why is the language going to be so harsh? Well, there's 2 things. One is God asks us to pour our heart out to him, and David does that, right? We all think many harsh things in our head about situations, about people. And then also, David is the king. Justice is his job. And he is appealing to God to bring justice. And maybe, and I'm supposing here, maybe it's a situation that very obvious is someone close to him, as we'll see from the language. And maybe David doesn't want to be the one to have to bring the hammer down, right? Like maybe he's appealing to God and like, well, God, maybe you could bring the hammer down some way in this situation. And he's just pouring out the pain of his heart, and he's also exhibiting a lot of self-control and yielding to God. So look at verse 1. It says, "Hold not thy peace, O God of my praise, for the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful are opened against me. They have spoken against me with a lying tongue. They compassed me about also with words of hatred, and they fought against me without a cause. For my love they are adversaries, but I give myself unto prayer. And they have rewarded me evil for good and hatred for my love." So King David appealed to God. And he's just saying, God, I need you to be involved in this. Please be involved, God. I feel that others are lying. Others are speaking hatred. Enemies fight against me for no reason, but I thought they were my friends. I know I have loved them. They are my enemy. I love them and do good. They hate me and they do evil. And in verse 4, he says, I give myself to prayer. The literal rendering, if you did like almost like word for word rendering of that in Hebrew, is I am prayer. And it's kind of a funny statement, and give myself. If you look at your Bible, like if you have a King James Bible, give myself unto is in is in italics, meaning they added that in, right, to help the sentence make sense. And it does make sense of the statement. The New King James Version, the ESV, they also word it the same exact way. Some other versions say things like, I'm a man of prayer, or I am in prayer. But I love the choice of translation here, because it's really a picture of the sacrifice and commitment that, God, I give myself to it. I give myself over to it, and to what happens because I pray, I will accept that. Right? And that's an attitude that a lot of people don't have, is God, I'm giving myself over to this. And what you decide, God, we will do, right? And so, or there's a lot of other things, God, I'm giving myself to this. There's a lot of other things I could do right now, but I will pray. So sacrifice number 4 is this: the sacrifice of revenge. And David could take vengeance. I mean, he's an old man here, but he could. This was a guy who could back up all the tough talk. He killed a lion with his hands. He killed a bear with his hands. He fought a giant, and when he went out to fight that giant and the armor didn't fit him, he said, forget this, it's too big. And he walked out there against Goliath with a sling and a stone and no armor, and he sunk that stone in the giant's head. Right? He survived in the wilderness for lengthy periods of time while being hunted. He had just an army of people who were just so loyal to him, who would kill for him. David could have handled this himself. And as a king, it was his job to dispense justice. But here he's calling on God to do it. Could he rightfully take justice and revenge? Absolutely he could. Does he? No. Why? Because he sacrifices that and gives it to God. And as we read more of this psalm, we're going to look at really a lot more of his pain here. We might ask, like, why does David ask for such mean things? Well, because someone was messing with God's kingdom. Right? And it's okay to pour your heart out to God, but David also felt like, when you mess with Israel, you're messing with God's chosen people and kingdom. And David understood that he was not the ruler of his own life, that the Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh was. Twice, he could have killed Saul when Saul hunted him. He didn't do it either time. He said, now Saul is still God's anointed king at that moment, but someone wasn't treating David like David had treated the king when David was not the king. Right? He was a man who wouldn't kill the king or speak wrongly against him. But when David was king, the people attacked him. In our our cancel culture world, I know people are kind of waiting to say, yeah, but David did all these bad things. Yes, but on this matter, he was just righteous. He was righteous on this matter. And what we do is we like to take vengeance with issues. We take it with our tongues, face to face to people, or with our action, or we talk about the other person and try to ruin them in the eyes of other people. We plot, we scheme how to get even. We're some of the most unjust people in the world, so burdened by the speck in someone else's eye, but oblivious to the 2x4s in ours, as Jesus says. And David could have killed his enemies. He had the army at his disposal, could have taken matters in his own hands, the hands of the warriors, but instead he says, I'll give myself to prayer on this matter. So we're going to read this prayer starting in verse 6. And many of us think like this. Many of us fantasize like this or imagine like this, but we don't pray like this. And that is what you need to sacrifice, is you need to spend all the time fretting and plotting and revenging and avenging in your mind. And why don't you spend that time in prayer asking God for justice? Verse 6. Set thou a wicked man over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand. Right? I mean, he just comes out firing. All right? When he shall be judged, let him be condemned, and let his prayer become sin. Let his days be few, and let another take his office. And stop there. Right? Which is, where do you also see that in the Bible? Right? In the book of Acts, when they are talking about Judas, Acts chapter 1, they refer to that verse as though it's a prophecy of Judas, right? So let his days be few, let another take his office. Let his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. Let his children be continually vagabonds and beg. Let them seek their bread also out of their desolate places. Let the extortioner catch all that he has, and let the strangers spoil his labor. Let there be none to extend mercy unto him, neither let there be any to favor his fatherless children. Let his posterity be cut off, and in the generation following, let their name be blotted out. Let the iniquity of his fathers be remembered with the Lord, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. Let them be before the Lord continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth, because that he remembered not to show mercy, but he persecuted the poor and needy man, that he might even slay the broken in heart. And just like he loved cursing, let it come to him. And as he delighted not in blessing, let it be far from him. And as he clothed himself with cursing, like as his was his garment, so let it come into his bowels like water, and like oil into his bones. Meaning, just let it seep into every part of him, God. Let it be unto him as the garment which covers him, and for a girdle where he is girded continually. Let this be the reward of my adversary from the Lord, and of them that speak evil against my soul. Wow. I mean, that's brutal. Like, not just him, his parents, his kids, let them all suffer, right? God, just basically give him his just desserts and how he has done and how he has handled anything. Can you imagine how your life could be transformed if you transferred the time you spent angry and meditating on sin and plotting, and you transferred it to praying, to begging God to step in and bring justice? It would transform you. Like, what if you took all the time this week you spent on how much you hate COVID issues because of President Trump or Governor Holcomb or a county's health commissioner or Governor Pritzker or Mayor Lightfoot and all the things they do or all the things they don't do, and you instead spend all that time praying for God to step in, straighten out who's right, who's wrong, and heal our land? You know, what if instead of moving others to anger with words and social medias and memes, you petition God in heaven to move and work out whatever situation it is? You know, what if you took the passion that rises up in your soul, the boiling blood, and instead of pouring that out on another human being in confrontation or thoughts or eye daggers or gossip or passive aggressiveness, and you took it to God? You know, a lot of people are passionate about issues, but when you pray, right, you'll talk about things that make you angry, and to people or with your words or your texts. But when you pray, there's like no passion, and you basically have the verbal passion of a grade school child trying to sound out his first words. You know, it's like that is the level at which you speak to God. And like, you know, you go from your passionate voice to your, God, please help Bob voice. You know, and it's just like, you know, where is your heart in prayer? You know, if you did this, you would not even consume more time in your life. You would merely change how you spend that time. You know, and it's a sacrifice, because there's something about us is we crave vengeance. I don't know if we like the rush, the endorphins, you know, or we just like the thought of the feeling of the person who wounded us getting justice. But what if instead you felt God's presence and his peace and his assurance, a calmness that he's in control instead of your anger? And instead of anger because you want to be controlled and you're not, because you, like David, give yourself to prayer. What if you made an incredible new connection with God because you went to him instead of caring for it yourself? Let's look at the next sacrifice. Would you look at verse 21? But do thou for me, O God, the Lord, for thy name's sake, because thy mercy is good, deliver me. For I am poor and needy, and my heart is wounded within me. And I am gone like the shadow when it declines. I am tossed up and down as the locust. My knees are weak through fasting, and my flesh faileth of fatness. I became also a reproach unto them when they looked upon me, and they shook their heads. Number 5 is this, in prayer, it's the sacrifice of vulnerability. Vulnerability is very uncomfortable. Transparency, very uncomfortable. David's heart is very wounded, and he exposes his feelings to God, right? He's like, I'm poor. Obviously, he's not poor financially, right? He's poor in the attacks on him and in his spirit. And I'm needy, and we don't want to be needy. We want to be self-sufficient. right? And he says like, man, my heart is wounded. And what's in your heart? You know, what's in your heart? It's trust, it's love, it's feelings, it's memories, and the wounding of those is dreadful. And it can be crippling to people. Right? He says, I'm gone like the shadow that declines. I disappear, and I'm nothing. I'm tossed up and down like a locust, and tossed up and down. This comes from one Hebrew word, and it means to cast off. It's literally like, you ever have like a bug land on your shoulder, and you're like, you know, you brush it off and knock it off of you. It's like, that's what I feel like. It's like my knees are weak. It's like this is affecting me physically. I've lost weight from the worry. I'm seen negatively in other people's eyes, and people are looking down on me. You know, when your heart is wounded and your feelings are exposed, tell God. Be vulnerable with Him. You know, I think a lot of people think they need such a sanitized version of prayer. Well, one day they clean up before they go to prayer. It's like, I need to be in a holy state of mind, a spiritual state of mind, a right state of mind in order to pray. And instead, you pray to get into those states of mind. It's like, you know, you go to a hospital to get well. You go to God to get well. The Bible says He's the counselor. He can teach you and empower you to thrive and succeed, or even lift your head for the first time in a long time, or forgive yourself, or to forgive your enemy, or to show you what the root problem is. Feelings can be so in the way. Some people always want to show their feelings. Some people try not to, but they can't help it. Some just shove it away. They don't want anyone to know their feelings. And we've been running an Engage group. That's a small group, but I like to use the name Engage because people need to engage, not just sit around and watch. And a group we've been doing on Tuesday nights is about something called the Enneagram, and it's taking kind of a biblical look at our personalities and faculties, and how they've been damaged and unused because of a lot of sin and our sins, the sins of others, and looking at how it all affects our relationship. And it's always interesting in the group because for the group to be effective, it does take vulnerability and transparency. And I mean, transparency in a group can feel like, you know, you're with a dozen people in a locked room and there's like a dead body on the floor. And you're like, I'm not saying anything, you know, because it's like make me more suspicious, or, you know, people look at me in a certain way. But pretty much every week, when people get past that fear and open up, it takes a while, like just healing takes place for people. You know, the other night we got in a conversation about the struggles a specific personality type has about prayer, and it's pretty raw to talk about things. You know, there's like that feeling as a Christian that, you know, you can feel like God's always judging me and He wouldn't answer a prayer for me anyway because He hates me. And, you know, for some people, until you admit things like that, it's like you just won't start to find healing. But that is something you can talk to God about in prayer. You know, in Psalm 109, it clearly shows that talking to God is not 100% just asking for things. It could be telling God how you feel. It could be telling God what you fear. It could be telling God where you feel cheated, how someone hurts your feelings, how you don't know how to handle a situation. For some people, not being able to handle a situation is like scarier than anything else. You know, you can tell God how mad you are at the government or your church or your spouse or your friends. You can tell God how you feel neglected by your spouse, how you wish you were somewhere different, how you were someone different, how you feel like a failure, how you struggle with sin, how there's adultery in your heart, lust in your heart, how you can't control your thoughts or actions, how much you fear the future because of current events, how you'd rather crawl up in a ball than deal with the world, that you enjoy being lazy, that you're proud, but you don't even know how not to be, that you're a liar, that you're angry, and none of those will surprise Him. He already knows. And I don't think you realize how much it will help cleanse your spirit if you were transparent with God. He would just hear what He already knows, but you will eventually see what He wants you to know about yourself and about Him. So I've given you 5 points on the sacrifice of prayer. We have to sacrifice what is selfish or fear-driven and sinful in order to pray. But honestly, as I was writing through the sermon, and a couple weeks ago I had this title picked out, The Sacrifice of Prayer. It's kind of I don't know if ironic is the right word, but it's really ironic to say that anything is really a sacrifice. Because if you follow through, what you're going to find is that instead of sacrificing, you trade up. And you have exchanged. And you will have exchanged better options for his will, and you'll find that that's better. You will trade solitude for walking in the presence of Jesus, and you'll find that's better. You will trade your physical strength for his spiritual strength, and it'll amaze you at the things you will be able to overcome. You trade vengeance for faith and long-suffering when it comes to God working. You trade transparency for relationship. You know, in the verses that follow, Jesus is praying. We won't look at him in Luke 6, I'll just tell you. 3 things happened. He names the apostles, he preaches the gospel, and he heals people. And you know why you need to sacrifice and pray, or trade up and pray? Because just like Jesus chose apostles, there are relationships you need to discover. You need to work with people to accomplish the will of the Father. You need to discover that will. You need the divine appointments to discover those relationships and partnerships that are going to make an eternal difference, just like how he chose the apostles. You know I need to sacrifice and pray? Because just as Jesus preached then, people need to hear the gospel today. And you know I need to sacrifice and pray? Because just as Jesus healed, people need healing. Whether it's from physical ailment, from spiritual bondage, and probably a person in need of healing is you. And prayer heals you too. Heals your spirit. Can heal your body. Could heal someone else's body. It can heal relationships. I amaze myself in a bad way. How often I come across a problem and I'll sit there and I'll think about it and think about it and think about what I should do and how we could do this, whether it's church, whether it's home, whether it's personally, and I don't know what to do. And after about 87 different pathways of thinking of what potentially could do, I'll be like, I'm going to pray. And it's like, that happened to me this week. I've been thinking about something for weeks, about making a decision. And I was like driving down the road. I was driving on 231 or 109th, whatever it is on the other side of 41. And I was driving, and I'm just like, God, I don't know what to do about this. And I'm just driving down the road a little bit. I drive like this, just in case you don't know. And I was just like, oh, it was like God just gave me the answer. It was like, oh, duh. Like, yes, that's exactly. I've thought about this for weeks, and I can't say I prayed too hard about it. I was just thought about it. And it's just such a trade up and so much, time I've wasted. But I don't know what God spoke to you about in prayer today, but why don't you go ahead and close your eyes and we'll pray for a second. Our music people come up, we'll do a song, and then I'll come back to the invitation. But God, we thank you so much for